I've always known I was the disappointment of the family. It wasn't something anyone ever said outright, but I could feel it in every sigh, every raised eyebrow, every time my parents looked at me and saw what I wasn't. I live with them, still, at 24 in the same small house where I grew up. My mom, Diane, and my dad, Richard, are both traditional, hardworking people who believe in real jobs with stable paychecks and retirement plans. And then there's me, a freelance illustrator. I spend hours sketching at my desk, pouring my heart into commissions, designing book covers, creating digital art. But to them, it's just a hobby. They never say it directly, but I hear it in the way they talk about my older brother, Nick. Nick is 5 years older than me, and in their eyes, he's perfect. A successful lawyer with a prestigious firm, engaged to a beautiful woman named Caroline, with a house in a wealthy neighborhood. At every family dinner, it's the same routine. Nick just closed a huge case last week, my dad will say, smiling with pride. His boss says he's got a bright future ahead of him. Mom will chime in, and Caroline is just wonderful. So organized, so elegant. They're thinking of buying a summer home soon. Then, inevitably, they turn to me. And Laura, Mom will say, her voice instantly cooler, "Are you still drawing?" Still drawing. As if it's something a 5-year-old does with crayons on the living room floor. Tonight was no different. I sat at the dining table, my plate mostly untouched, while Nick talked about his upcoming wedding. Caroline sat beside him, nodding gracefully, her manicured fingers resting lightly on his arm. She looked every bit the lawyer's fiancé, elegant, poised, in a sleek beige dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent would if I lived alone. I was thinking, my mother said suddenly, cutting into my thoughts. Maybe it's time you got a real job, Laura. The words stung, even though I'd heard them before. I do have a real job, I said, keeping my voice even. Dad sighed. You know what your mother means. Something with a stable income. I make money, I insisted. I pay my bills, But you don't have a career, Mom interrupted, shaking her head. You have no health insurance, no benefits. What happens in 10 years? 20? You can't just keep playing around. Nick cleared his throat. I actually have a friend at my firm who knows someone in marketing. Maybe you could apply for a graphic design position. I clenched my jaw. I don't want a corporate job. I like what I do. Silence. An awkward, suffocating silence. Then Mom gave a soft, pitying sigh. Sweetheart, we just want what's best for you. No, they wanted what was best for them. A daughter they could brag about. I pushed my chair back. I'm done eating. Laura, Dad said, but I was already leaving the table, my appetite gone. I shut myself in my room, but the walls weren't thick enough to block out their voices. She's being sensitive again, Mom muttered. She'll grow out of it, Dad replied. Nick said something I couldn't make out, and then they all moved on to his promotion, to Caroline's wedding dress, to things that mattered to them. I stared at my unfinished sketches on my desk, my tablet pen resting beside them. I loved what I did. But in this house, that love meant nothing. I shut my bedroom door and let out a sharp breath. My parents' voices still carried from the dining room, but I refused to listen. My chest was tight, my throat burned, and my stomach twisted with that familiar, ugly mix of anger and frustration. Every dinner was the same. Every conversation about my career, my future, my so-called lack of stability, it was always the same. I didn't know what to do with the anger. Normally, I would open my sketchbook and start drawing until the emotion settled, but tonight, the thought of picking up a pen just reminded me of their words. Still drawing? Playing around? It made me sick. So instead, I grabbed my phone, sat cross-legged on my bed, and opened Reddit. I'd been lurking for years, mostly scrolling through art communities or looking at other freelancer struggles, but I rarely posted. Tonight, though, something inside me snapped. Before I could overthink it, I opened r/drew off my chest and started typing. My family treats my job like a joke because my brother is perfect. I hesitated for a second, then started writing. I'm a 24-year-old freelance illustrator. I make enough to pay my bills, I love what I do, and I work hard every day. But my parents refuse to see it as a real career. They compare me to my older brother constantly. He's a lawyer, he's successful, he has a house, a fiancé, a future they can be proud of. At every family dinner, I sit there and listen while they talk about how great he is, and then when they turn to me, they say, "Are you still drawing?" As if my job is something a child does with crayons. The words came faster than I could think. Tonight, my mom said maybe it's time I got a real job. My dad said I don't have a career. My brother, trying to be helpful, offered to hook me up with someone in marketing, as if I've been wasting my time all these years and should just switch paths immediately. I'm so exhausted. I love art. I love what I do. But in this house, love means nothing if it doesn't come with a salary, a title, and a retirement plan. I know I'm not the only one who has been through this, so if anyone else has had to deal with being compared to the golden child and treated like a failure, I'd love to hear your stories. Just so I don't feel like I'm losing my mind. I stared at the post for a moment, debating if I should delete it. But my fingers moved on their own, and I hit post. I locked my phone and threw it onto my bed. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. By the time I checked my phone an hour later, my notifications had exploded. Hundreds of upvotes. Dozens of comments. People were sharing their own experiences, their own resentment toward parents who compared them to siblings, who dismissed their dreams. One comment stood out immediately. I could have written this myself. My brother is a doctor. I'm a musician. Every holiday dinner, my parents make me feel like I don't belong at the table. Stay strong, OP. Your art matters. Another. Freelance work is so underappreciated by older generations. Just because you don't work a 9 to 5 doesn't mean you're not successful. Keep going. And another. This hit hard. My sister is an engineer, and I'm a writer. My parents introduce us like, this is Emma, our engineer, and this is Sarah. She, writes sometimes. It was overwhelming. Dozens of people, then hundreds, sharing their experiences, telling me I wasn't alone. By morning, my post had gone viral. People were messaging me, some offering encouragement, others sharing their own bitterness, their own regrets. Someone even asked if I had a portfolio. Then came the text from Nick. Nick, hey, we need to talk. I ignored it. A few hours later, another. Nick, seriously, call me. And then finally, Nick, I saw your post. I get it now. I stared at my screen, my heart pounding. He saw my post? I hesitated, then finally typed back. Me? What do you mean? Nick, can we just talk? I'm outside. I jumped off my bed and rushed to the window. Sure enough, Nick's car was parked outside our house. I sighed and grabbed a hoodie before heading downstairs. He was leaning against his car, looking different. Not his usual polished, confident self. He looked tired. I crossed my arms. You read my post? He nodded. Yeah. And Nick exhaled, running a hand through his hair. At first, I was pissed. Not because you wrote it, but because I realized how blind I've been. I always thought I was helping. I didn't get why you hated the comparison so much. He looked away, jaw tightening. But then I started reading the comments. And it hit me. I'm not the only one you're being compared to. You're constantly being compared to me. And that's awful. I swallowed hard. Nick sighed. I never told you this, but growing up, I felt it too. The pressure. I had to be perfect. The perfect grades, the perfect career, the perfect fiancé. There was no room for failure. Do you know why I became a lawyer? I shook my head. Because Dad told me I should. He gave a bitter laugh. I never even considered anything else. I just did what was expected of me. And you? You fought for what you love. I never had the guts to do that. For the first time in my life, I saw something I never expected. Nick wasn't perfect. He wasn't invincible. He had cracks just like me. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. He hesitated, then met my eyes. Because I don't want to be part of the problem anymore. Something inside me softened. For years, I thought Nick had it easy. That he enjoyed being the favorite. But now, standing in front of me, he looked more like a prisoner of expectations than the golden child. I let out a slow breath. So, what now? Nick gave a small smile. Now, I think we both start doing things for ourselves instead of them. It wasn't a solution. It wouldn't fix years of resentment overnight. But for the first time, I felt like I had an ally. The idea of moving out had been in the back of my mind for years, but I'd always pushed it aside. Living at home was suffocating, but it was also safe. No rent, no utilities, no sudden emergencies draining my bank account. And for a long time, I told myself that as long as I had my room, my art, and a locked door, I could survive it. But after my post went viral and after my conversation with Nick, something inside me shifted. I didn't want to just survive anymore. I wanted to breathe. So I started looking at apartments. It was immediately depressing. The cheapest studios in the city were around $2,000 a month, and that was for a cramped, windowless box where I'd probably hear my neighbors sneezing through the walls. Anything even slightly decent was pushing $2,500 at least. Even with my commissions, even with savings, even if I stretched every dollar, I was barely scraping the bottom of what I needed. I didn't tell my parents. Not yet. I already knew how that conversation would go. Instead, I told Nick. We met up at a coffee shop downtown, a place he probably wouldn't have stepped foot in if I hadn't dragged him there. It was small, a little run down, but the coffee was good, and the barista, a girl with green-dyed hair and a septum ring, gave me a knowing smile when she saw me. Medium caramel latte, she asked. I grinned. You know me too well, Tasha. She turned to Nick, who was still staring at the menu like it was written in ancient Greek. And you? Just a black coffee. Tasha gave me a look like, seriously, this guy? But she rang us up, and we grabbed a table in the corner. So, Nick said, stirring his coffee even though there was nothing to stir. You're really doing this? I nodded. I have to. He leaned back in his chair. Okay, what's the plan? I hesitated. Well, that's the problem. I found some places, but the prices are insane. I can just afford it if I live paycheck to paycheck. But Nick didn't let me finish. He pulled out his wallet and slid something across the table. A check. For $2,500. I blinked. Nick, what? It's for the down payment, he said casually, like he wasn't handing me an entire month's rent in one go. Call it a moving out gift. I pushed it back toward him. No way. I can't take this. He pushed it right back. Yes, you can. Nick, this is way too much. He sighed. Laura, for years I've had mom and dad backing me up. They helped me through law school, co-signed on my house, gave me every safety net I could ever need. Meanwhile, they treat you like an inconvenience just because you chose something different. So yeah, I want to do this. Take the damn check. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Nick wasn't perfect, but for the first time, I felt like I had an actual brother. Thank you, I said, my voice quiet. Don't make it weird, he muttered, taking a sip of his coffee. I rolled my eyes and stuffed the check into my bag before I could second guess it. I found an apartment by the end of the week. It was small, really small, but it had a big window, enough space for my desk, and most importantly, it was mine. Then came the hard part. Telling my parents. I waited until after dinner, when the dishes were cleared and the TV was humming in the background. My mom was scrolling through her phone on the couch, my dad reading the newspaper. I took a deep breath. I found an apartment. Silence. Mom looked up first. What? I'm moving out, I said, forcing confidence into my voice. I already signed the lease. I'm leaving at the end of the month. Dad set his paper down slowly. And how exactly do you plan to afford this? I have savings. I have a steady income. I can do this. Mom let out a sharp breath. Laura, this is ridiculous. No, what's ridiculous is me staying here when it's making me miserable. She stiffened. Miserable? Yes, Mom. Miserable. I clenched my fists. I love you and Dad, but I can't keep living in a house where I feel like a failure every single day. Dad's jaw tightened. This isn't about feeling like a failure. This is about being responsible. You don't have a real career. You don't have stability. I have enough, I shot back. Maybe not by your standards, but by mine. Mom stood up, shaking her head. I don't understand you. We gave you everything. A home, food, support. Support. I let out a sharp laugh. You don't support me, Mom. You tolerate me. And only as long as I keep my head down and pretend I don't hear all the ways I don't measure up to Nick. Dad's expression darkened. So that's what this is. You're running away from your family because you can't handle a little criticism. My heart pounded. I'm not running away. I'm moving forward. Mom shook her head again like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. So Nick gets you an apartment, and suddenly you think you're independent? I flinched. He didn't. Oh, don't lie to me, Laura, she snapped. You can't even afford a place like that without help. Nick probably handed you money, and you took it like a child. I gritted my teeth. I didn't ask him for anything. He offered because, unlike you, he actually believes in me. Dad exhaled sharply. This is a mistake. Maybe, I admitted. But it's my mistake to make. Mom sat back down, crossing her arms. Fine. If that's how you feel, do what you want. Dad just shook his head, picking his paper back up. You'll regret this. I swallowed hard. Maybe. I turned before they could see the tears in my eyes. Moving day came fast. Nick helped me load my things into his car. My clothes, my art supplies, my laptop. It wasn't much, but it was mine. My parents didn't come outside. I wasn't surprised. But it still hurt. When Nick pulled up in front of my new apartment, he shut off the engine and glanced at me. You good? I nodded, even though my chest felt heavy. You're doing the right thing, he said. I gave him a shaky smile. I hope so. He helped me carry my things inside. The apartment was quiet, the air smelling like fresh paint and a hint of dust. I set my bag down and exhaled. This was it. I was finally on my own. And for the first time in years, I felt free. My apartment still smelled like fresh paint and new furniture when everything changed. It had been a month since I moved out, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was building something for myself. My commissions were steady. I had a small but growing client base, and I even started a personal project, a digital illustration series based on reimagined fairy tales. At first, it was just something fun for myself. I posted my work online like I always did, not expecting much. But then something crazy happened. One of my illustrations, a dark, haunting take on Little Red Riding Hood, went viral. It started with a few shares, then a couple of art blogs picking it up, and before I knew it, my inbox was flooded. People wanted prints, collaborations, commissions. And then, the email that changed everything. A major fashion brand, Celeste & Company, wanted to license my artwork for their upcoming fall collection. I had to reread the email 3 times before it sunk in. They were offering $20,000 for exclusive rights to one of my pieces. $20,000. I stared at the number, my hands shaking. That was more money than I had ever seen in one place. More than I made in an entire year freelancing when I first started. I called Nick immediately. Holy shit, he said after I finished rambling. Laura, this is huge. I know. My voice was still shaking. What do I even do? I don't have a lawyer, I don't know how contracts work. Don't sign anything yet. I'll put you in touch with someone at my firm who specializes in contracts for creatives. He'll make sure they don't screw you over. You'd do that. Nick scoffed. Of course. You think I'd let some corporate sharks take advantage of my little sister? I laughed, the anxiety in my chest easing. Thanks, Nick. You earned this, he said firmly. And Mom and Dad can't say shit now. Oh, right. Mom and Dad. I hadn't told them yet. I should have known better than to expect excitement from them. But some part of me, a stupid, naive part, thought that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. That when they heard I landed a $20,000 deal, they'd finally see my career as something real. So that weekend, I went back home for dinner. It was already tense the moment I stepped inside. My parents barely acknowledged me, and I didn't miss the way my mom eyed my outfit. I had started dressing more like myself since moving out. Oversized sweaters, chunky rings, boots instead of the sensible shoes she always tried to push on me. I sat at the dinner table, the same spot where I had endured years of backhanded comments and comparisons. My dad was reading his paper. My mom was scrolling through her phone. I took a breath. So, I have news. Mom barely glanced up. What is it? I clenched my hands under the table. A fashion brand contacted me. They want to buy one of my designs for $20,000. Silence. For one fleeting second, I thought I saw something like pride in my dad's expression. But it disappeared just as quickly. Mom finally set down her phone. 20,000? Yes, I said, forcing myself not to fidget. It's a licensing deal. They'll use my artwork in their collection. Dad nodded slowly. Well, that's a nice start. Nice start? Mom took a sip of her water. We just hope this isn't a one-time success. The words felt like a slap. I swallowed hard. It's not. You don't know that, she said. One deal doesn't mean you have a real career. What happens when the orders stop? When the trends change? You can't just rely on luck, Laura. My chest tightened. It's not luck. I worked for this. Dad sighed. No one's saying you didn't. But you have to be practical. You can't expect to live off one big paycheck. Mom nodded. Exactly. This is why we wanted you to get a stable job. You need security. I clenched my fists under the table. Security. That's all they ever talked about. Security, stability, a real career. They never cared if I was happy. I laughed. Short, bitter. You guys really can't be happy for me, can you? Dad frowned. That's not fair. No, what's not fair is you sitting there acting like this is some fluke. Like I didn't just prove that I can actually make a living doing what I love. My voice was rising now, but I didn't care. Nick gets a job at a law firm, and you throw a damn party. I land a $20,000 deal, and all I get is, we hope this isn't a one-time thing. Mom pursed her lips. We just want you to be realistic, Laura. You don't know how long this will last. Before I could explode, Nick spoke up. Are you kidding me? His voice was sharp, cutting through the room. She just made more money in one deal than most people make in months, and all you can do is downplay it? Mom shot him a warning look. Nicholas. No, he said, voice firm. You two have treated her like a failure for years. And now that she's proving you wrong, you still can't give her even one moment of support. Dad's jaw tightened. Nick, stay out of this. No, Nick snapped. I stayed out of it for too long. I sat here at this table and watched you make her feel like she wasn't enough. But you know what? She's more than enough. And she's doing better than half the people I work with, without your help. Mom's face was cold. You don't talk to us like that. Nick scoffed. Maybe if you listened for once, I wouldn't have to. Silence. Thick, suffocating silence. Mom turned to me, her voice eerily calm. So what? You bring your brother here to fight your battles now. I exhaled sharply. I didn't ask him to do anything. He just actually cares. Dad shook his head. This is getting ridiculous. No, I said, standing up. What's ridiculous is me thinking you'd ever be proud of me. Mom's expression didn't change. Dad just picked up his paper again. That was it. I grabbed my bag, my pulse pounding, and stormed out of the house. Nick followed me, his jaw still clenched. I turned to him, my voice shaking. You shouldn't have done that. He frowned. Why the hell not? Because now it's worse. Nick sighed. Laura, it was already bad. I swallowed, staring at the car, at the street, anywhere but him. He softened. You know I'm proud of you, right? I blinked fast. Yeah. Good. He gave a small, tired smile. Because someone in this damn family needs to be. For the first time all night, I felt like I could breathe. Nick's wedding was something straight out of a luxury bridal magazine. I hadn't seen the final venue until the day itself. But the moment I stepped inside the grand ballroom, it was obvious that no expense had been spared. The chandeliers dripped with crystal. The flower arrangements were towering masterpieces of ivory roses and deep green vines, and the guests all looked like they had stepped off the pages of a fashion editorial. It felt surreal. I adjusted my dress, a deep burgundy number that I had spent way too much money on but refused to regret, and took a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. I had barely spoken to my parents since the last argument. We exchanged the occasional text, polite, surface-level things, but nothing deep, nothing real. At first, it hurt, but over time, I had learned to let it go. I wasn't here for them. I was here for Nick. The ceremony was beautiful, if a little long. Caroline looked stunning as expected, in a lace gown that probably cost more than my rent for the year. Nick, for all his usual confidence, looked nervous as he waited at the altar, and I found myself grinning at the rare sight of my usually unshakable brother, looking like he might pass out. But when Caroline walked down the aisle, everything shifted. His face softened, the tension in his shoulders eased, and by the time they said their vows, I could tell. He really loved her. I was happy for him. Despite everything, despite our parents, despite the way we had spent years barely understanding each other, Nick had always been there. And seeing him finally get something that made him happy, that meant something. The reception was just as extravagant as the ceremony. There were speeches, more champagne than anyone could reasonably drink, and an after-party that I knew would last well into the night. At some point, Nick found me standing near the edge of the dance floor, watching from a distance. Not gonna dance, he asked, his tie already loosened, his jacket long since discarded. I snorted. Not unless you want me to embarrass myself in front of half of New York's elite. He smirked. Wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. I rolled my eyes, but before I could reply, he sighed and ran a hand through his hair. I meant what I said, you know. I frowned. About what? He exhaled. Back at dinner. With Mom and Dad. I looked away. Yeah, well, it didn't really change anything. I know. He hesitated. But I need you to know something. I turned back to him. Nick met my eyes. I've spent my whole life trying to make them proud. Doing what they expected. And you? You didn't let them break you. You built something on your own. I swallowed hard. He continued, voice quieter now. I used to think I had it easy. That I had the perfect life. But I see it now. You fought for yours. And I admire the hell out of that. I blinked fast. Nick. He cleared his throat, suddenly uncomfortable. Anyway, just wanted you to know. I laughed. That was the sappiest thing I've ever heard. He groaned. Yeah. Don't make me regret it. I grinned, nudging his arm. Thanks, Nick. For what? For believing in me. He gave a lopsided smile. Always. That night, as I sat in my apartment, I made a decision. For years, I had been waiting. Waiting for my parents' approval. Waiting to be taken seriously. Waiting for some magical moment where I would finally be enough for them. But I didn't need to wait anymore. I was enough. I was more than enough. And I wasn't going to hold myself back any longer. The next morning, I called a real estate agent. A week later, I signed a lease for a studio space in the heart of the city. It was expensive, $3,500 a month, but it was mine. A bright, open loft with floor-to-ceiling windows, exposed brick walls, and enough space to expand my work. It was terrifying, and it was the best decision I had ever made. I threw myself into work, taking on bigger projects, collaborating with brands, and even launching my own online store. And then, somehow, things got even bigger. A publishing house reached out, wanting me to illustrate a book cover. Then a gaming company commissioned a concept art series. Before I knew it, I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. Mom and Dad didn't acknowledge it at first. But then one day I got a text from Mom. Mom, saw your artwork on that fashion site. It looks nice. Not I'm proud of you. Not congratulations. But it was something. A week later, Dad forwarded me an article about freelance artists making six figures, followed by, seems like this is becoming a real career. Progress. Slow, painful progress. I wasn't sure if things would ever be perfect with them. Maybe they would never fully get it. But that was okay. Because for the first time in my life, I didn't need their approval. I had myself. And that was enough.